to be his friend and to have fellowship and abandon your ways of what you're going to do. Now, Judas doesn't do that, but that's the symbolism behind that. Jesus wanted Judas to not carry out his plan, what his intention was. Now, this has implications, and we'll talk, I'm sure, at the presiding remarks and all that. This has implications for what we do on Sunday morning when we have bread and wine. This is a meal that was given to those who believed, those who would be in fellowship, and those who would be friends of the Lord. And so this idea of a meal, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this idea of a meal stretches all the way through the Bible. It shows up at resurrection for sure. When people are raised from the dead, the first thing you normally read afterward is give them something to eat. Have a meal. You see, in fact, you'll see that where Jesus raises the 12-year-old damsel, and he says, give her something to eat. With Lazarus, right afterward, what do we have? We have a meal. So you can follow this pattern of having a meal after resurrection. And what happens, the judgment seat and the resurrection afterward? Well, there's a great meal. Is there not? There's a great meal that takes place. In fact, we've talked before that there's actually a second meal, more private. But this idea of what he's offering to Ruth is, here, eat this meal with us. And, you know, the reapers are there, the workers, the handmaids. And Ruth must be sitting there going, why is he going out of his way? I'm just here to glean the fields. Why is he doing all this? And you see the motivation behind Boaz is that he sees a woman who's helping her mother-in-law survive. He can see that. He can see great character in Ruth. He knows, by the way, we talked earlier, the reason he knows, of course, is his mother, Boaz's mother, was Rahab. And he saw her character as well, even though she wasn't initially. She was a Canaanite. She wasn't part of Israel. So we see here this love story developing, to have bread and wine, have a meal, and sit close by with my fellow workers. You're almost like saying, hey, you're part of the family. How about you sit here? Again, Ruth knows his name is Boaz. And we're going to see later this discussion with Naomi. She hasn't quite put all the pieces together. Now, one thing I do want to point out. Back in Ruth 2:14, it says, talking about the parched corn and all that she ate, says she ate and was sufficed and left. And where she left was to go back and glean again. That's where she left. She wasn't sitting around saying, that was a great meal, I think I'll just rest. So it wasn't a siesta or anything like that. But when it says that she was sufficed and left, what it actually is saying there, if you look it up, is she took the leftovers she had to save it for Naomi. She was taking extra. We do this sometimes when we, maybe at a potluck, you like something, you take it home with you and have additional food. So she's going to take it home back to Naomi and say, look at the meal. Why don't you share this meal that I was given by Boaz? It was a really nice thing he did. But she went back out in the field to work some more. And I'm sure Boaz is observing all this and going, this is a very unique woman. Basically, I'm glad I have the meal, but I've got other things to do. I need to go take care of Naomi. That's my mission here. My number one mission is to help my mother-in-law and take care of her. This is great love being shown between Ruth and Naomi. That's a picture, by the way, of the Chera set. By the way, I understand you can buy that in stores today. I've never bought this before. It's got, like what said there, nuts and honey and wine. I mean, it sounds good. But again, this is something, and I am assuming, and I don't know this, that this might be part of the Jewish Passover itself, that they might have this during their Passover time. But again, something if you're interested in doing, you go to the store and, again, I don't know exactly where it would be, but this is something you could actually have and know that this has a past history to it, way back in time. So they had roasted corn. By the way, she was gleaning in the barley fields, but he presents to her corn that's been roasted. I'm sure some of you have done this before. I used to remember many years ago, we would take corn that was unhusked, put it in a fire and let it burn, and then take it out, and you'd have it hot and roasted and things like that. By the way, this is way off subject, but I understand you can do the same thing in a microwave. You can actually leave it unhusked, put it in a microwave, and it'll come out hot and everything, and slide right out. So you don't even have to husk it, you just take it out. But anyway, he's presenting to her a meal, and she's very appreciative of it, and she's very, uplifted by it, but she's got work to do. Do you see the mindset of Ruth here? Ruth says, this is all well and good. I'm pleased to be in your field and whatever, but I've got a job to do. I mean, yes, I'll sit here a while, have a meal, talk with you a little bit, talk to the reapers, whatever, but I got something I got to do. It's called work. Now, we won't read Proverbs 31, but this is a virtuous woman. If you read Proverbs 31, you find a woman who's constantly at work. You don't see any rest in Proverbs 31. She's taking care of her family. She's making sure that they're clothed well, they eat, that she even says buys a field. She's actually heavily involved. Her day is consumed with work in Proverbs 31. And this is a virtuous woman. Now, we can talk this out if you like. I'll raise the possibility that when Solomon wrote Proverbs 31, many people say it was Bathsheba he was referring to. I suggest he's thinking of Ruth, because in Bathsheba's case, a bit different, but in Ruth's case, you definitely see a woman who is out there doing, it's like the woman never rests. She keeps on going. And after gleaning in the fields, guess what she's going to do the next morning? The same thing. She's going to get up, go out in the fields, do the same thing. So think about that, whether or not this virtuous woman of Proverbs 31 is in fact Ruth. And I think it fits Ruth really well. Again, we won't read those verses there. It may be very familiar to you. Certainly, that's a bit of homework for you, just to read it again. By the way, even though it talks about virtuous woman, it's talking about all of us as the bride of Christ. All of us are supposed to be workers, not relaxing and whatever, but actually that we should be doing things to make things better. Now, here's where things get a little bit more interesting, because Boaz now talks with his servants. Why don't we have someone read verses 15 and 16 there in Ruth chapter 2. So if anyone has that pulled up, I've got a microphone here. Who would like to do that? Don't touch that one. This is not, now it's on. Okay. So what is it that Boaz, he pulls his foreman over and the servants and says to them, hey, look, see that woman there? I want you to deliberately drop more grain down. Let her get closer to you as you're reaping. Don't don't worry about it. Put handfuls down if you like. Now, Ruth doesn't know that. The servants are told to actually give her food. Now, there's that verse on the board that we're familiar with. Now, unto him that's able to do exceeding abundantly of all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us. Think about that. In our lives, has God exceedingly abundantly given things in our life that we ourselves would not expect to have? You're about to see this play out in a little bit. But this idea of giving more to her is something to consider. So he's telling his servants, give her more. Why is he doing that? Why is he telling the servants to drop more grain? Basically, yeah, a lot of it. What's the purpose of that? He just trying to be nice? What's his reason for doing that? He has a reason, but yeah, he knows that she's not getting the grain for herself. She's getting it for her mother-in-law as well. So he wants to make sure she's taken care of as well. He's showing love towards Naomi. That's a person, a relative of her, of his as well. So he's saying, give her more. Make sure she has plenty. And you're about to see she has plenty. There's something else, though, that Boaz does in giving more grain to Ruth. And it has to do with what Jesus said. And and we've been developing this model of Boaz as Jesus. So why don't we get a reader for Matthew 11, verses 28 and 30. Matthew 11, 28 and 30. Do we have a reader for that?
And 30 or through 30?
Yeah, Matthew 11, 28 to 30. Huh?
But if I cast out, no, it's 12. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest unto your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light.
One of the hidden messages here is what Boaz is doing is making Ruth's burden lighter. She doesn't have to go scour the area for the grain. It's right in front of her. She can start collecting it right there. He's lessening her workload, giving her a lot more, but he's lessening her workload. And does the Lord do that in our lives? See, those are unseen things that we're not appreciative of. How the Father and the Lord Jesus lift the burden off and say, yes, they're working, but I can make it easier for them. Now, he says here that in Matthew that to seek him out, and I can take your burden off you. But Ruth didn't ask for that. He just did it. And part of the reason we've had this discussion before is that when it comes to asking for help, for our burdens to be lifted, not just us in this room, but I would say people in general, don't ask for help. They know they need help, but they don't ask for help. Maybe they're embarrassed to ask for help. Maybe they're like the disciples. I can do it myself. No reason to involve you. I know I can do this. Maybe so. Now, when the disciples are in the boat bailing water, it was like, no need to disturb the master. We can do this. We're fishermen. We know what to do. No, they didn't. No. They eventually turned to him because they realized they can't do it. But as someone once said in class, or one of the classes years ago, he says, people are afraid to ask for help. And one brother mentioned to me, not here, That's because, oh no, it might get around to other members. And they didn't want that.
Just the point I had was, you're saying, hey, look, people are hesitant to ask for assistance, regardless of what the situation is. And it's been a long-standing tradition, essentially, that, we only help those who are elderly in our community. Yet you're looking at Ruth. Yes, she was essentially her and just Naomi, so she was maybe in a position of more need than the average person. But we as a community have sustained this, oh, they're older, so only the older members require help. But that's simply not the case.
That's true. And by the way, Ruth is asking permission to glean the fields, which she didn't have to do. By law, she was allowed to do what she was doing. But she didn't ask Boaz for extra. She's not saying to Boaz, hey, we could really, you're a wealthy man, maybe you could help us. She didn't say anything like that. But Boaz, behind the scenes, says, I can help you. I can help you and your mother-in-law. So, good.
Just a quick point on the exact opposite would be Pharaoh, what he does to the children of Israel when they're supposed to make bricks. He had been providing some of the straw, and then he says, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to make your burden harder.
Yes.
And I'm not going to expect any less.
That's true. And I'm sure we could make our other people's lives harder by certain things that we say or do.
I think an important point that we don't want to miss is that he's not gathering this grain for her and giving it to her. She's required to do some work, which gives her worth and value and what they would call nowadays sweat equity. So that's part of the lesson as well, is we have work to do. We can lighten the burden, which is what you've said, but you don't take away all the work so that they have no value. We see that in our society today where that's common practice, but that's not healthy.
And there is dignity in work. What did the first man and woman do in the garden? They're put to work. So God even created this idea. And it wasn't after the sin. I'm talking about before the fall. He says, go in there and dress and keep the garden. You got work to do. And that's, I think it's, because if you don't do that, you take the dignity away from a person, respect from them, just to give things that they didn't earn or even do. So now, Ruth comes back to talk to Naomi, part of our story, and that's in verses 17 through 23. Now, if you read the expositor, and here's where I need all of the bakers in the room involved, but they say at the end of the day, she's collected 5 to 6 gallons, not just a little bit, 5 or 6 gallons of barley. Now, the question, and I tried to do the math, but I'm not good at this stuff, because if I ever try to cook stuff here and find out, I guess I put too much in, or too little in. If you had 6 gallons of barley seed, or any grain seed, how many loaves of bread would that make? So I don't expect an answer today, but if you'd like to go explore it and do the math on that, I came up with one answer, and then I did it again, came up with a whole different answer, and I was like, I'm not going to try this. So, but think about that when Naomi or when Ruth shows Naomi, look what I got. Naomi's going, this doesn't look normal. You don't go and glean the fields and get 6 gallons of grain. It's not a normal thing. You don't do that. So then Ruth tells her, she says, what field are you in? I'd like to know. And Naomi's quizzing her. He goes, there's this man named Boaz, and he's letting me glean the field. And then at verse 18, she says, I have some corn I got at the meal. Wait, a meal? Naomi says, you were invited to a meal? That's not something that people in the fields were invited to. They're there to take whatever it is they need and leave. What meal? And so Naomi's looking at this going, there's something not quite adding up here. Now, Ruth, I think, is a lot more, I don't want to say naive, but a lot more innocent in this. She's like, well, I mean, the grain was there, so I just picked it up, and it just happened to be a lot of it, you know? I don't know, maybe the reapers are very bad at their job or whatever. But she tells Naomi all this. And Naomi says, Boaz is one of our near kinsmen. Go ahead, you had a comment?
I was just going to say, and the quality of the barley. Remember, a lot of times they were just the rotten ones, the ugly ones they'd let fall to the ground. But maybe it was even the quality of the barley that she could tell. This isn't the normal ruins that fall to the ground or are left behind.
And they're very close to, they're reaping, very, very close.
It wasn't just the grain. She got the stalks too. What they left was the stalks. So she didn't have 6 gallons of barley grain to take home. She had 6 gallons worth of stalks and be some grain in that.
Anyone else? Okay, so what's interesting now is that she hears the name Boaz, and she says to Ruth, oh, that's one of our near kinsmen. There's a lot in what she just said. The first thing, the word kinsman means redeemer. And the word that she uses here, mizgolam, means the one who has the right to redeem us. But she says to her, if you watch carefully, he's one of our near kinsmen. He's not the only one. He's one of them. So he obviously, Naomi knows her genealogy, by the way. We'll find out Boaz knows his genealogy real well, too. But she says, oh, that person you're with, he could be a redeemer. He has the right to do this. And they're talking about, or she's talking to her about the Levirate marriage, which I don't know how much Ruth understands. I'm not convinced that Ruth understands this. He probably knows his law, but doesn't understand the whole custom behind it and what it's intended to do. Is there a comment back there? Did you have a comment? No? Okay, I thought I saw a hand. So, Ruth has to figure out whether or not Boaz is motivated by this law. And Naomi wants to find this out too. Naomi's like, well, he has the right to redeem us. By the way, as far as I can tell, when a widow passed away with no children, no husband, the Levirate law came about. And how long should that have taken place? How quickly should they have had one of their near kinsmen redeem them? I don't think very long. A few days. I mean, obviously the law was there for a purpose. And so if you look, and we're going to treat with Naomi at the moment, the Levirate law should have been enforced or brought forward very quickly. I mean, you're not going to leave a widow in Israel that had near kinsmen alone and say, well, hope she does well. So the idea of invoking that law should have been fairly quickly. And I would suggest to you in the book of Ruth, this is a fairly quick process. This is not a month or two that we're talking about. I think we're talking days here, which in itself is quite interesting. So she tells Ruth, stay in his field. He's protecting you. And that's the same thing that Boaz told her. Don't go in any other field. I can take care of you. You can glean this field. Don't leave the field. We have another. Yeah.
Is it on? I just want to point out what Naomi says when she finds out that it's Boaz, that it's one of their relatives. And it shows, it's one of those times that God's purpose in life is obvious to us. She says, the Lord bless him. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. Because as we all remember, Naomi was so incredibly bitter and just depressed over her life. And at this moment, she's like, God has not stopped showing his kindness to me. And I think that's a really beautiful moment for her.
It is a beautiful moment. She knows, this is an opportunity. But as we saw in chapter 1, her problem was, I can't have children. I'm too old. And that's where we see the Lord's hand in this through Ruth. So we see that there's others here, and she says there to her, keep fast, keep close to him, cleave to him, stay in his field. And that's the admonition to all of us in this room. Stay in the field of your Redeemer. Don't leave. He can protect, he can provide, he can do all those things. And by the way, that's part, if you look about it in terms of marriage, that's part of the role of how marriage is. The husband protects and provides, and the wife benefits, spouse benefits. By the way, in our society today, if you say the word patriarchy, you're going to get in trouble. Go ahead.
It's just interesting along that line of thought that as disciples, we've been called into Jesus' field. Boaz called Ruth into his field. Ruth could have said, the grass is potentially greener in another person's field. Maybe I can get better reaping somewhere else. We have that same possibility for that thought to go into our head. Maybe we should go into another person's field. Maybe we should go into the world's field and try to make do out there, which we see what happened with Elimelech and how that did not pan out very well. And so there's that calling for us is either we can choose to stay within the field of the Lord, working in his vineyard, working with him, or we can try to make ends meet by ourselves where we will not be taken care of like the prodigal son did.
You were asking a couple minutes ago, why wasn't Naomi redeemed? And if you look at the law in Deuteronomy 25, it appears to me from reading it that law would only apply if there wasn't any seed that had been brought forth. So the fact that Naomi had 2 sons through Elimelech, then the law wouldn't have applied.
Right. Right, it would not have applied. But they all died. I mean, the law is pretty clear in this case. That's back why I said earlier, Naomi knows the law. Boaz knows the law. Ruth is still learning. And this has, we'll talk about more of this in the weeks coming, this is how we as Gentiles get grafted into the Jewish faith. This is how we are drawn in. And by the way, when we talked about this a bit, but I think it's important, the question is, how did all of us actually end here? How did we get here on Sunday morning? I'm not talking about driving. How did we actually end up here? What in our lives caused us to even end up sitting here? Do we see God's guiding hand? He's guiding Ruth to the fields of Boaz. Now, Ruth may not see that, but we see God's hand working. He says, I'm going to bring her. As Jesus said, my Father draws people to me. And we see the drawing, unseen hand of God in our lives. He draws us closer, and he guides us there. And it's not an accident that Ruth ends up in the field of Boaz. No accidents at all. Not lucky, not fate, none of those things that the world wants to call. No. This is on purpose. God, in God's way of looking at it, I'm drawing this person and that person, and I'm guiding them to the field. Now, it's true, as mentioned earlier, we can leave the field. We can say, I don't like this, I don't like the ecclesia, I don't like this or what. You can do any of those things. It's free will. But it's dangerous because we need a redeemer. We need someone to protect and take care of us. And the Lord Jesus can do that. He is our redeemer. So I said here 2 love stories is actually 5, but keep in mind that these love stories are interconnected to the whole story. I want you to see as we go forward, Naomi is talking to Boaz through Ruth. It's really quite nice, is that Ruth is kind of being guided or taught. But see Naomi speaking through her and see Boaz speaking to Naomi in the same way. Ruth, the Gentile bride, is going to come in and bring all three individuals to it. The Levirate marriage was for who? It was for Naomi. It wasn't for Ruth. There's nothing in the law that says if a widow of Moab doesn't have any children, you should go marry her. It doesn't say that. The Levirate law they're talking about, Naomi knows that she can be redeemed by Boaz. Ruth is going to play a very important part, of course, in the lineage. So I want you to see that. And so here's some questions we're going to leave you with. They use the word, Boaz uses the word, under my wings. And that word wings, we're going to talk about that later, gets into a much deeper area of study. The role of a protector and redeemer, we see the Lord Jesus doing that. He protects us, he redeems us, he provides things to us. In the world today, this idea of what they call a patriarchal society, there's a lot of pushback on that, but that's exactly what we see here. And then there was an interesting question. So who is the Naomi of the Gentiles in the Bible? I thought that was, and we'll talk about that more. I want you to think about that. Who plays the role of Naomi in bringing Gentiles to the truth? And finally, we'll do a little deeper dive on lineages, because that's important too, with Moabites and all that. So that's a very important lineage line. So we're up against the clock, so we'll stop right there.